Hey everyone.
Hi.
Thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate you being here today. And I see a lot of faces that I know in this room, which is awesome. But for those who don't know me, my name is Alicia Roth Weigel, and I'd like to take a second to introduce myself so that you know who's in front of you. As I said, my name is Alicia. I'm named after a hurricane that hit Houston in the early 80s, so you should have an idea of what you're in for. But originally I'm from Philadelphia. I live in Austin now. I am a runner. I love to dance, especially to reggaeton. And soup dumplings are probably my favorite food, and raisins are definitely my least favorite food because they're weird and shriveled. But yeah, I have a tattoo of orchids on my shoulder. Not sure if y'all can see it, but because they are the symbol of a movement that I'm part of, because, oh yeah, I was born intersex. So those are all parts of me and all different parts of my humanity and my existence. And I don't find any of them to be a threat to y'all's existence, but doctors and society have deemed that last descriptor, the intersex one, not okay. And so not okay, in fact, that they operated on me as a kid to remove certain organs that they didn't deem normal. And they tried to surgically remove that aspect of my humanity. Unfortunately, they didn't know that it wouldn't be that easy to take it from me. But you know what they did take from me? They took my physical autonomy, my ability to live without supplemental hormones, which carry health risks and are expensive, especially under our current president and current system without universal health care. And they took from me my emotional stability when I spent all of my formative years believing that I was completely alone because of a secret that society and medical practice told me that I was never supposed to tell. They took from me my fertility, my ability to produce natural children from my own genetic material, when they forced sterilized me. And no, this is not a sci-fi novel, this is my life. But this isn't a pity party, this is an empowerment party. And I'm so happy to have you all here for it. So let me back up a little bit and give you some context as for everything that I just mentioned, so that you know why I'm here and why you're here on a Sunday afternoon listening to me. I'm here in this space because a bunch of people here in Texas wanted to push people deemed different into separate spaces physically to make themselves more comfortable without regard to our shared humanity. I'm referring to the discriminatory bathroom bill that attempted to force transgender people to use the bathroom aligning with the arbitrary gender assigned on their birth certificate. So I'm going to kick off this discussion with the testimony that I delivered against that proposed transgender bathroom bill this summer during a special session called by Governor Greg Abbott to push an agenda of hate. Think of this as a coming out story that I shared not with a family member or a close friend, but a committee of Texas senators, approximately 500 advocates from across the state, and countless others watching on television screens throughout the Capitol that day. And as I share this approximately 2-minute encapsulation of my entire life experience and who I am as a human being, try to put yourself in the mindset of one of the Texas legislators listening on this dais on that day. And I know that's hard because we're not all rich, white, cis male members of the GOP. But as my boss always says, to have someone understand your life experience, it's important to step into their shoes. So let's all take off the sparkly rainbow platform stilettos of the LGBTQIA movement for a second and suspend reality and step into some boring brown penny loafers. Okay, here we go. Madam Chairperson and members of the committee, my name is Alicia Weigel, and I'm a resident of Austin, the director of a gender equality nonprofit, and I have XY chromosomes. I stand here representing the I in LGBTQIA in the hopes that, because I look more gender normal in the current societal conception of what that means, you might hear my words in a different light. Any discrimination stems from a lack of understanding, after all. I stands for intersex. Because of a condition called complete androgen insensitivity, I was born phenotypically female on the outside with a woman's anatomy, but with internal testes instead of ovaries on the inside. And they were subsequently removed as to not become precancerous. This practice is now heavily contested, only 27 years later, in light of the exponential advancement of modern medicine, as it is a remnant of this still present gender ideal and wanting to normalize children from birth to avoid a life of hardship and shame. While I find it absurd that I have to disclose my anatomical history to a room full of strangers, legislators no less, that makes me feel more compelled to do so, because while I'll unfortunately never bear children, I am extremely privileged to have been born in a way that my discrepancy from the gender norm is not immediately apparent, not worn on my sleeve, and that has saved me much persecution up to this point. I can tell you that I'm very much a woman. Not that every woman or any race or group of people has any particular tendency, but I paint my nails. This one's called Fuchsia Star. It's pretty sparkly, just a side note. I read Us Weekly. My mom will tell you that I refused to wear pants as a kid, insisting on wearing only purple or pink skirts, and I had way too many Barbies. I help manage Wendy Davis's nonprofit focused on women's rights because my experience as a victim of discrimination in the workplace, as a survivor of sexual assault, and so much more bind me to the common plight of what it means to be a woman. Does that mean because of my genotypic XY chromosomes, I've been using the wrong bathroom my whole life? No. It means who cares what bathroom I use? If my life experience is equal to that of a female, I should be able to identify as such, and I do. I am a woman. And regardless of my gender, a bathroom is a bathroom. It's a place that all humans, regardless of gender, engage in a common activity that we unfortunately have not yet evolved out of. I urge you to reconsider your feelings on what I feel is an extremely harmful piece of legislation. One that tying your name to will, I believe, tarnish your legacy as a legislator. As generations become more accepting of and adamant about enforcing civil rights, if not for the betterment of the lives of others you don't know and may never understand, think of your own families and how you want them to appear in history books. Please vote no on Senate Bill 3. So that was this summer, and we were able to kill that bill, thanks to Danielle and so many other people in this room. But the fight's not over for trans people or for intersex people. So I'm going to backtrack even a bit further and give you a better sense of who I am as an intersex person to help you understand the challenges we face and to unpack a few aspects and points touched upon in that testimony that I just gave. I've never fit into boxes. In college, I couldn't join a sorority because I didn't vibe with any one of the different reputations each had. The smart one, the fun one, because I felt that I embodied or recoiled from certain elements of each of them. You'll never see me in a pearl necklace. I also didn't fit into a given major. To my college's chagrin, I was the one student out of a class of 4,000 to graduate with an independent major because I wasn't having any of those double major and minor combinations. My favorite music doesn't really have a genre label either. It's that Latin beat, soul influence, minimal, dream poppy, Afro disco, you know, that Pandora station that doesn't exist? And I feel most comfortable and confident in conversation when I'm speaking with members of my God family in Brazil who speak both English and Portuguese. Because when I'm speaking Português, as I call it, I can pick the words that make most sense to me in both languages. The increased options for vocabulary allow me to be my most expressive and paint the best picture of what I'm trying to say, and the blend is the beauty. Same with gender traits. I definitely have aspects typically considered feminine. For example, I'm extremely in touch with my emotions, and masculine. I'm pretty assertive, or as Wendy would say, aggressive. And I was born with non-binary reproductive organs physically. So wouldn't it make sense that my mental, emotional, and moral character might also not fit into an A or B category? But the problem is, people want boxes. They want to make life make sense because it's easier. Easier for folks, that are Caucasian, heteronormative, in a patriarchal system that we exist in. But this need to normalize everything, even humans, comes from a place of fear. We, everyone in this room, we're the antithesis of that. We accept that everything that exists on a spectrum. There is gender fluidity, there's sexual fluidity in terms of preferences, but also biological fluidity. There's a whole rainbow of intersex conditions that range from a chimera, or two zygotes that fuse in utero to create one human, a human with XXXY chromosomes. A lot of those people exist, and some of them I count as friends. Or someone like me that started out with XY chromosomes, but didn't respond to a certain hormone called androgen in the womb. So I stopped at a certain stage of developing before reaching what was obviously an optional finish line. I'm honestly not surprised. I've never been one to follow arbitrary rules, starting with incessantly questioning my mom's "because I said so" when challenging a bedtime or why I had to eat my broccoli. So yeah, I'm not shocked that the genetic material that would one day become Alicia didn't adhere to a typical development trajectory. All humans actually start out with common female genital anatomy until 7 weeks after conception, when we sexually differentiate. Some intersex folks like me stop there and end up somewhere between the sexes, hence intersex. But unfortunately, and dangerously, a lot of people in our country, including politicians, no longer operate on facts nor trust in science. So in pushing the bathroom bill, Senator Lois Kolkhorst, God love her, used flawed reasoning to assert that biological sex is cut and dry, and that once we go back to that, then all these perverted gender fluid believers will go away. So that's when I decided that an intersex person showing up in front of her face would help prove to her and all the haters that they were wrong. If they refuse to believe in the fluidity of gender and sexual preferences, well, then give them something they can see. You can't deny a spectrum of biological sex when 150 million humans are visibly born, not purely one or the other, in terms of internal gonads and or external genitalia. Let us be that physical, visible evidence they can't deny, because sometimes for some people, seeing is believing. But in order to be that evidence, that tangible, visible, scientific evidence that every letter of the LGBT acronym exists, we have to exist. And that means that our existence can't be erased by surgeries before we're old enough to have anything to say about it. You heard that right. Doctors condoned by medical associations, not only in third world countries, but here across all of our United States, enact unconsented and often medically unnecessary surgeries on children to normalize us at birth or soon after. To put it bluntly, they play God, pick a gender for a kid, remove or reconstruct anything that they don't think fits that gender, and then tell the family they're fixed. So, from a pure human rights standpoint, the UN Commission Against Torture defines it as intersex genital mutilation, or IGM. Think about Nazi eugenics, or experiments that used to be done on slaves, or even fictional characters like in Stranger Things, where Eleven is trapped in a research complex against her will as a child. That's still reality for a lot of intersex kids, like me. So let's unpack what that means on our lives. From a physical standpoint, a doctor at Cornell University, my own alma mater, named Dix Papas, not joking, his name is Dix Papas, performs surgeries on little girls that he calls clitoroplasties. He has a literal measure of what he determines to be the normal size of a clitoris. And if it's bigger, he cuts it down. That renders many of these girls unable to feel sexual pleasure or experience any healthy sex life due to scar tissue, but also psychologically scars them for life, especially when he tests on them with a vibrator afterwards to gauge how much sensation they've retained as part of his experiment. So that's just the physical and psychological scarring, but from an identity standpoint, things are just as bad. My friend Mo, co-founder of the Houston Intersex Society, was born with ambiguous genitalia, which was then removed when the doctors in his family decided he would be a girl. So once he finally had the courage to transition and come out as who he is, he now bridges both the trans and intersex communities as a trans intersex man. That's one way in which our experience is intertwined with the trans experience. In being persecuted by the establishment, in this case, the medical industrial complex that profits on surgeries, and operates on moralistic and discriminatory ideologies that we intersex folks don't fall into. Whereas trans people face barriers to getting the healthcare they need through barred access to surgeries sometimes needed to realize who they are, we are having those same surgeries to rearrange, remove, or otherwise reassign our gonads and genitals forced upon us. If there's anyone in this room that can tell me how that makes sense, I'm all ears. But we all know why it is. It's because the opposition to our existence isn't scientific, isn't logical. It's based on a perverse conception of morality that views us as a threat to humanity. However, surgically chopping something off a human child is not going to remedy the ills of humankind. There's no band-aid for that kid undergoing a series of surgeries they don't need, and medical procedures can't be used as a band-aid over societal stigma and shame. We are people. We're not specimens, we're people. Society creates stigma and shame. Those are not natural phenomena like we, intersex people, are. Babies aren't born knowing racism, sexism, hate, but some babies are born not 100% male or female. You can try to erase that evidence with your surgeries, but we're still here. And I can tell you that as an intersex kid, we're not fixed after these surgeries. This identity shapes so many of our life experiences, like the most traumatic period of any of our lives, junior high. I remember when I was in middle school, we were separated by gender before all of our sex ed classes. I would go with the girls, and they would start talking about our periods, which I'd never get, and about the experience of having a baby, which I'd never have. And the shame and isolation I felt led me to such an extreme state of anxiety that I had what I now see in hindsight to have been a full-fledged panic attack when I passed out in the classroom. Or when I found out recently that 2 of my family members were getting a divorce, and one of them used my intersex status as leverage to extort funds from another family member, threatening to out me if this family member didn't cede certain assets in the agreement. So of course, my mom, as any other mother bear would do, threatened to bring down the entire world of that individual if he dared to so much as mention her child's name ever again. And let me make something very clear. I will not be your bargaining chip in a divorce or any sort of disagreement. And I will not be your guinea pig lab rat in any sort of medical experimentation. I will not be your band-aid over serious issues of homophobia, toxic masculinity, and fear of the other that permeate all aspects of our society. I won't be your band-aid, but I can be your bridge. All of us in this room, our greatest threat to normalcy is also our strength. As trans people, as intersex people, as bisexual people, we're the least understood, but actually we're the most powerful. So I mentioned before the word chimera, when fraternal twins fuse in utero into one person. My friend Kuma, the other co-founder of the Houston Intersex Society, is literally a superhuman. 2 humans that combined into 1 human. And that view, that appreciation at our fascinating and beautiful existence has actually been the norm in many societies and even religions, from ancient Roman and Greek mythology to modern religions like Hinduism and Kabbalah Judaism. In some cultures, we used to be revered because we can transcend the boxes. They're limited, and that gives us more perspective. We refuse to settle with what we're given, so we're more resourceful. As we talk about transcending boxes that might be used on a form, application, or census, it helped me to think about race too. We had an interesting discussion about this in my last retreat for a fellowship that I'm part of. And while I can't claim to understand the experience of a person of color, here are my 2 cents on how our struggles are actually more similar than what one might think. In Brazil, where I mentioned I have family, you're not considered black or white as you are in the US. It's not a racial binary. Within the realm of being black, there's preto, pardo, negro, moreno, and more. It's all shades. So while that leaves room for plenty of colorism and other major issues, what it means to be black, as we define it in the US, is not only about the shade of your skin. A white girl with a fake bake is not black. To be black is to share that common experience of black Americans, both the horrors of police brutality and discrimination, but also the music and the food and the style and the beauty that everyone wants to enjoy, mimic, and in some instances, unfortunately, appropriate. So, similar to that range of skin colors within a community, we simplify as Black. To be intersex is not that we all have the same anatomy or physical appearance either. We're a huge range. With complete androgen insensitivity, I have different biological characteristics, for example, than someone with even partial androgen insensitivity. We exist with a broad variety of conditions, not disorders, which is our first point of education for the medical and broader community. Similar to the former struggle to combat racist phrenology that intended to prove certain swaths of the population were scientifically less than others. So that's why we have to start by changing the science, and science in quotes, aka the societal views of the medical community. We have to attack the problem at the root before we can stop intersex genital mutilation through surgeries altogether. You can make a medical practice illegal, but whether it's negative or positive, so let's use abortion as an example, making it illegal is not going to stop people from performing it. If people really want to do something, they'll find a way. So what we have to think about with intersex surgeries, not abortions, let me make that clear, is change the way that people think so that they're not being blocked from performing these surgeries, but rather that they understand why they shouldn't want, let alone need, to perform these surgeries in the first place. So to do that, we have to convince people that our humanity, the fact that we, 2% of the entire world's population, are born like this, that shows that being intersex isn't a disorder, it's a type of human being. Just like being gay isn't a disorder, it's just a naturally occurring phenomenon. And while the world is still coming around to that idea, we've dramatically reduced the instance of electroshock therapy on gay kids in the past few decades alone. So I have hope, and I know that we can stop these surgeries on intersex kids too. We just have to take that first step by helping people understand that being intersex isn't a pathology, it's our identity. We have to assume that identity proudly. Being intersex is my identity, and it's beautiful. Intersex is beautiful, trans is beautiful. That's why I'm an advocate for trans rights too. We come with a range of physical traits, but as people who have and continue to face discrimination for our discrepancy from the gender norm, we all have certain things in common. We have all experienced stigma and shame. We've all faced uncertainty as to the best way to care for our health and well-being due to a lack of proper medical care and resources, and we've all faced questions as to who we are. Whereas trans people are killed, which just happened this last week in San Antonio, or barred from public spaces for who they are, we are chopped up as children in one way or another and forced to cope with little or no resources on how to do so. But whether through bathrooms or through surgeries, we all share that experience of being shoved into or pushed out of a box where we don't fit. And that perspective binds us through empathy. Empathy is learning an experience. Not because you shared it or experienced it yourself, but because you're open to understanding someone else's. It's a choice, not a circumstance you were born into. We should all recognize how powerful that is. We need labels now, the LGBTQIA acronym, races, genders, nationalities, because we have to assert and demand improvement of specific issues all of these specific communities face. But the more that we can all cross those barriers through radical empathy, the better chance we all have together. I really believe that. This is our need for inclusivity and intersectionality, not for a reason of tokenism, but because we never know how one person's perspective will be that one cog in the gear that makes the light bulb go off for someone else in a way that no one else had before. This is why I chose to advocate against the bathroom bill in the first place. It wouldn't affect me, but my new perspective perhaps changed the mind of someone on that committee who wasn't open to hearing the perspective of those that would be affected by that bill, my trans brothers, sisters, and comrades. I didn't say, this isn't my fight. I admitted the privilege of my circumstance as a passable white woman, and I asked to join the fight for people that I cared about. And what was my added value? It was one new perspective from one more lived experience that might shift the way someone would leap from fear to faith. That was my choice. And I mentioned that before in regards to empathy, that empathy is a choice. It's not an experience we're born into, it's one that you're choosing to put on. Bravery is also a choice. I don't believe, as many think, it's something you're born with. It's a choice to move forward with something difficult regardless of circumstances and fear. Choosing to put a foot forward rather than to stay still. Choice is the most necessary and powerful thing that exists. It's the difference between life as a free agent and a slave to circumstance. That is why I fight human trafficking, but support voluntary sex work. That is why I support reproductive rights. That is why we cannot enact medically unnecessary surgeries on young bodies before they've had the agency to determine who they are. In order to do that, we must all shift our thinking from a box to a circle, and then take that circle and make it like a Venn diagram with someone else's circle. Because our experiences overlap in ways that aren't always immediately apparent, but there's always some nuance of someone's humanity that we can relate to in some way, shape, or form. And we as a country, we made a choice to elect this leader that we have. The more we all commit to understanding that nuance of the human condition, including in a political context. Believe me, I don't like talking to these Trump people either. But the more that we commit to understanding that nuance, the less we'll be limited to echo chambers, and the more that we'll have productive conversations where, even if little by little, even the most stubborn of folks will start to understand one another through inevitable empathy. So how do we accelerate that process? What gave strength to the movement of the LGBTQIA moniker was a conscious decision to humanize an issue defined by a confusing acronym, to translate a combination of letters into experiences through stories. We all believe in equality, but marriage equality really gained traction when the movement shifted away from equality as an ideal and toward a conversation about two people who love each other and just want to enjoy that same symbol of love as the straight community. We, as intersex people, want the same freedom to be who we are, openly and without shame, and without someone else making a decision for us as to what that looks like, just like everybody else. Humanizing this fight will help shift the perspective. Until recent years, that perspective has gone unnoticed because it's been too quiet on the IA front. And because the personal stories that give that acronym meaning had not yet been spoken. In the past few years, we've had Pigeon, Jonathan, Irene, Kimberly, and so many more coming forward in the intersex movement. Emily and Emily, who sit right in front of me. And finally, someone super visible, Hannah Gabby Odiel. I was inspired by this high fashion model who came out as intersex in the glossy pages of magazines read not just by activists, but by everyday humans, including myself. And because of her, I finally felt compelled to share my own story. Because one story breeds another and another until it becomes part of our general conscious understanding. Once we all share our true selves, not with those like us, but with those unlike us, that is where true empathy will occur by osmosis, or the process of gradual and unconscious assimilation of ideas and knowledge, by proximity to those whose minds really need to be changed. The less we segregate ourselves, even politically, in our own camps, the more this transfer of ideas and sentiments will naturally occur. It's not always easy. It's sometimes painful. But this is a choice that we all have to make. A choice to see and believe in nuance, to try to understand it through empathy, and to act on it. We would not have killed that bathroom bill had it not been for the cis, trans, gay, straight, black, white, documented and undocumented allies who all chose to show up. Now it's time to show up and stand up for intersex issues. So I'm going to ask everyone in the room who has the ability to do so to literally stand for a second. Can everyone who's able please stand up? Thank you. My boss stood up for 13 hours to put a stop to an anti-abortion bill during her historic filibuster in 2013. And there she is standing right in front of you today. Thank you. She's an example of how taking a true stand for something isn't easy, isn't comfortable, it's sometimes painful, but when it's worth doing, you do it for others who deserve that physical deed. Okay, y'all can sit down now. Because I need you to conserve your strength. I'm gonna need each and every one of you to not just pay lip service to our movement, but I'm gonna need y'all to stand physically in a room for the hearing of a bill that I'm working on alongside other amazing intersex activists across our state. I need y'all to stand at the Capitol again, like you did for Wendy in 2013, to fight again for our right to have autonomy over our own bodies. Now, 5 years later, we're still fighting for it. And if you're a part of our global family and don't have the pleasure of living with us here in Texas, I need y'all to stand for something by sharing our cause on social media, talking about it to your friends and family, and not being a passive bystander in the discriminatory fight against people like me and our right to exist. Thanks for your time today and for your commitment to moving forward to live a life beyond boxes. Once we prove that humans don't fit into boxes, through radically living our own unique experiences, we'll realize that we are no longer boxed in and that the limit literally does not exist. Thank you all so much.